from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, calm on Wall Street amid the trade turbulence. The S&P 500 topping 6,400 today, hitting a fresh record on the new CPI data out this morning, showing inflation accelerating in July to the strongest pace since the start of the year. An inline reading that bolstered speculation of a Fed rate cut in September. We'll go behind the numbers up ahead. Plus, with National Guard troops arriving in Washington following the president's order, we'll discuss how other U.S. cities are bracing for the potential fallout when we speak with mayors on both sides of the aisle. And the war of words between the U.S. and China, despite an extension of their 90-day truce. Why Beijing is now urging firms to avoid Nvidia's H20 chips less than 24 hours after the president authorized resuming those sales, and what it foretells for the negotiations that are now underway. But we begin tonight on Bloomberg TV and radio with the latest from the White House after the S&P 500 hit a record high today following the latest CPI data from July, pushing investors to bet on a Fed rate hike next month. Today's rally coming as we learn the details of the president's pick to lead the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Heritage Foundation's Eli Antoni, who suggested the agency should suspend its monthly jobs report, something White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt downplayed today.
If the jobs data is not reliable, should Americans trust the inflation data?
Well, look, the jobs data has had massive revisions. We want to ensure that all of the data, the inflation data, the jobs data, any data point that is coming out of the BLS is trustworthy and is accurate, which is why the president has restored new leadership at the BLS.
All right, joining us for more on that and a potential lawsuit now against Fed Chair Jay Powell from the President of the United States, Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson. Wendy, it's always a pleasure to have you here at the desk. You can, of course, spin numbers any way you want here, and in this case, you could spin it toward Fed action or point to strength in the economy. Or if you're a Democrat criticizing this White House, you might say that the impact of tariffs is finally starting to show. How's the administration framing this?
The administration is framing this as, frankly, any administration would, as a win, right? The inflation is in line with expectations, but the expectations were for an increase, and they got one. And it's not as bad as a lot of people were fearing yet. Economists are still believing that the worst is yet to come, or worse is yet to come on this data. And so, yes, the administration, of course, spun it in a very positive way. And to be fair, just as Joe Biden did when, the economy wasn't doing well, and he would say, look at these great numbers, I mean, that's just what presidents do. I think more alarming was what you were referring to of Antoni, the next BLS chief, if he is confirmed, saying, we just won't put out monthly jobs data.
He had said that months ago. Does he still believe it today? Do we have any idea? The administration says, by the way, it will not suspend issuing jobs reports.
Right. It also said they want to take a look and see what's going on. So I think Leavitt left herself a little wiggle room at the briefing, to at least listen to what he has to say. We think he still feels that way. I mean, that is the most important set of economic data that is released every month. Businesses use it, markets use it, economists use it. The government uses it. It is crucial that those numbers come out. And these revisions the administration is talking about are just normal standard operating procedure. It's a leading indicator. And as Bloomberg has reported, when the data catches up, they revise. Sometimes it's a small revision. Sometimes it's a little revision.
Yes, right.
But that's the way it works.
Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. Bloomberg's Wendy Benjaminson live in Washington as we turn now to how analysts reacted to the data today on Bloomberg.
What we see is that inflation creeping over and spilling over from goods into services. And that is an issue for the consumer in terms of, is the consumer now starting to make tougher choices because of the impact of tariffs?
It appears that companies have room as a result of still high margins coming out of the pandemic. Companies have room to sort of more slowly pass this on to consumers.
People say, the retailer's going to eat it. No, they're not. They just wrote the check. So of course it looks like they're eating it. Walmart writes a check, but eventually they're going to pass it on.
It comes one way or the other. It's either going to be corporate margins, which all else equal is a drag on the stock market, or it's going to be in the consumer, which is a drag on the economy, which then feeds through to the stock market.
All right, for a look now at how the market interpreted the data today, we turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick joining us live from world headquarters in New York. Romaine, pretty good mood today.
Yeah, and it was quite a move higher. You mentioned it earlier, record highs for the S&P and the NASDAQ 100, and that was largely based on an inflation report that was not necessarily good, but for a lot of investors, it was good enough. The idea that it will provide enough wiggle room for the Fed to begin cutting rates as soon as mid-September, and that was a big part of the reason for the rally. But as you heard from some of the voices that you just played, there is some concern here that we're maybe not getting the full picture, or maybe not the picture as it might be several months from now. The idea that, yes, tariffs are in effect. In fact, we got data a little bit earlier today showing about $28 billion in tariff revenue collected just in the past month in July. The big question is, well, who's paying that? As David Kelly alluded to, maybe a lot of corporations are eating that cost right now. And if they continue to eat that cost, we will see that show up in the bottom lines of these companies. And of course, if they don't eat that cost, then it gets passed on to the consumer, and we'll see that show up in maybe a potential downdraft in consumer spending. But for right now, investors seem to cheer what they heard earlier today, and even the president of the United States used it as an opportunity to kind of say, I told you so, saying, look, we implemented these tariffs, we implemented these trade policies, and at least as of July 2025, we have not necessarily seen a huge negative impact on them in the data.
Romaine, thank you. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, live from New York. Joining us now from a view from inside the administration is Peter Navarro, White House senior counselor for trade and manufacturing. He has the president's ear on tariffs. Some might suggest that you're the architect of this idea. We're going to get to all of this. I want to start with you. I want to start with you on CPI today, the big day for data. First, are you buying these numbers because these are from BLS?
Yes, I'm buying the numbers, and I want to amplify a little bit what Romaine said.
Yeah.
This wasn't a bad report or just an okay report. It's a very good report, and let me explain. The CPI came in at 2.7%, which seems significantly above target. But in fact, the Federal Reserve uses another gauge called the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index.
We love the PCE.
And that one runs 0.2 to 0.4 lower. Okay, so we get closer to target. Next, if you look at the annualized based on a 6-month basis since Trump took office, you know what it is, Joe? 1.9%. 1.9%. So then when you dive into the individual numbers, you had energy prices down. That's a very big deal. You had food prices flat. That's good. Shelter costs were up, but that's a mirage because the way the shelter costs are calculated, it's very much a lagging indicator. If you look at the private rental surveys, you can see that those costs are coming down. In part because they're coming down, but also because we're dealing with the surge we had in rents from the surge from the Biden illegal immigration. So all of this is pointing to a really beautiful situation with inflation. And the message to too late Jay Powell, is come on. And the other thing is the things that went up. If you look at the things that had a little bit of bump in them, airlines, used cars, things like that, none of that's tariff related. And so, again,
we saw a big jump in services, in fact. It wasn't goods prices in many cases, which I'm guessing you feel as vindication in this case. But I want you to hear from a guy named Stu who I talked to. You know Stu Leonard's grocery chain up in the Northeast?
Let's hear from Stu. Sure.
Stu is having trouble, he said, prices have started to go up a little bit. He's wondering where the line is and whether he has to pass some of this on to his customers, just to go to ground to a small business owner. Listen to Stu Leonard Jr. from earlier tonight.
Right now, what we're just trying to do is navigate. We're eating a little bit of the margin, and we're already on thin margins in the supermarket business. So we're eating some of it. I can't eat it forever. We're hanging by our fingernails right now. I mean, we can't do this forever. And I'm hoping all of Trump's tariff deals and everything will work themselves out. And I'm hoping we'll go into the holidays with, like Trump said, low prices.
That was from last week. By the way, this is not, he has no problem with Trump. He doesn't even seem to necessarily have a problem with tariffs in concept, but he's dealing with his reality. What would you tell him to anticipate in the next 6 months? Because You saw him hold him by his fingernails.
He's going to be selling a lot of food with people having bigger incomes. You know, again, just reflecting on the report that you showed while I was sitting here, it's like they're saying, well, it's either the consumers are going to eat it with inflation or the producers are going to eat it. But the third possibility is the one which actually historically shows is the case. The reason why we're not seeing inflation because of the tariffs is because it's the foreign countries that are eating the tariffs. Why did they do that? Foreign countries, the big ones we run the big trade deficits with, we are their biggest market, okay? If they can't sell to us, they're in trouble.
Do they pay it by giving it to their companies, or how do they?
Their companies have to eat it.
Where's the check?
The companies earn less profits at the expense of, we win, they lose. The way the
Goldman research on that, right? It got the president pretty upset today. Goldman found, according to its research, that consumers in the U.S. have absorbed about 22% of tariff costs, businesses 64%. You're saying that's just not true.
The only entity which has less respect in terms of their data than the BLS these days is Goldman Sachs. I mean, think about it, Joe. It's like the advantage I have is I was here during the first term of Donald Trump. And everybody was saying that we were going to have this wild, out-of-control inflation. The Wall Street Journal personally, twice in lead editorial, said there was going to be a Navarro recession because of tariffs. This never happened. And Goldman Sachs was one of the big voices that was always doing the panicking inflation kind of thing. I just don't trust their numbers. And the reason why the American public shouldn't trust their numbers is because their numbers are usually wrong. And I had to fight, interestingly enough, in the first term. The first guy who was the National Economic Council director was Gary Cohn. He was a Goldman Sachs guy, right? He's the guy, Hassett does the job now beautifully. But I had to fight Cohn every day when he was there because he kept saying, Mr. President, these tariffs are bad. They're going to cost consumers. They're going to slow everything down. They never did, and Cohn left with his tail between the legs because he was always wrong. But the point, Joe, is trust your eyes. Trust your eyes. We're not seeing anything like that.
Well, there's a question about trust that you raised with BLS over the jobs report. That got Wall Street questioning a lot of data coming out of the government. And some folks after the E.J. Antoni appointment today were saying, you know what, okay, we've got a Trump loyalist in there now. Maybe it's time to start looking at private research. Maybe the government shouldn't even be in this data business.
I do think having more private data available, I mean, we have a lot of that now that feeds in to Wall Street's perception.
Should we have monthly jobs reports? Antoni was saying,
not until we get it straightened out. So I mean, if I were to go in there and try to deal with that, that's exactly the same thing I would do. It's like, hey, let me figure out. No, I didn't tell the president that. No, but I'm telling him right now. He's watching your show. It's like the point here, Joe, is if you look at the arc of the BLS data going back to 2018, they consistently got things wrong in ways which punished Trump. Okay? I mean, it's very clear. The 2018 tax cut was working beautifully. They had bad data that said it wasn't. And then in the Biden years, they created 1 million. I mean, you can't even wrap your head around this. 1 million phantom jobs that they hadn't had to erase after Donald Trump got elected in February 2025. Those didn't really exist, but they were designed to prop him up. And then
that was the August revision, though, right?
What's that?
That was the August revision, August 24 revision, I think.
No, there was. Look, there was yes, but they didn't complete the whole wipeout until February.
I want to ask you about Jay Powell before they wrap us. The president says today he might sue him, might sue the Fed chair over the renovation that's happening at the Fed building here in Washington. Is it serious, Judy?
The Powell Mahal, is that what they call it these days? Come on. It's like the American people deserve better. They deserve better from Jay Powell. They can't manage. Heck yes. Yeah? Yeah. I mean, look, it gets your attention. It's like, what is he doing there? He's spending the taxpayers' money on just why he's not watching costs. It's beautiful. You contrast with him the way Donald Trump does things in the White House. He's undergoing a major renovation. He watches every penny. When he was getting Air Force One a new Air Force One, which we desperately need. He negotiated personally with Boeing and brought the price down by, I don't know, a lot of money, a lot of coins. So the point with Powell, my beef with Powell is basically, if you look at performance, he's had 3 major blunders in the 6 years he's been there, which have cost this economy tens and tens of billions of dollars and over a million jobs.
But just lastly, Peter Navarro,
sure.
is this the most recent attempt to get him to leave, or this is a lawsuit that's going to be served?
I'm not getting in the middle of that, but I'm going to say to the American people and everybody on Wall Street, this guy, I mean, in fact, what he's doing with like the BLS, he's just giving us bad information and then making decisions based on that bad information. I mean, he can't tariff uncertainty. That's what he says. There's no uncertainty. We're seeing the data, Jay. Get with the program.
He never minces words. Peter Navarro.
I'm from California.
You call the Fed chair dude? I don't know if that's happened before on Bloomberg. White House Senior Counselor for Trade and Manufacturing. Peter, thank you for always coming over to talk to us. Coming up, the president deploying National Guard troops to the nation's capital, where we sit now. We'll discuss how other U.S. cities are bracing for the potential impact in their own communities. But first, now that the president has extended the China tariff truce for 90 more days, we'll discuss what's next with Michael Froman, former U.S. trade representative in the Obama administration. He's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Tariffs are important. It's not the only thing that matters. These companies have been battle tested over and over again. There certainly will be some winners and losers, but I will say I wouldn't underestimate corporations' ability to adapt.
I expect by Q4 or even in early 2026, if these tariffs persist, though that's when we'll see more of the impact.
The market is beginning in the long end to look a little bit more wobbly when it comes to inflation expectations.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Those are just some of the economic voices from earlier today on Bloomberg's surveillance on this CPI day. Now, with the perspective on the state of trade and trade deals, Michael Froman, president of the Council on Foreign Relations, former U.S. trade representative in the Obama administration, is with us now live on Bloomberg. It's great to have you back, sir, on Bloomberg. We just took quite a dive with Peter Navarro on the impact of tariffs or not, according to today's CPI. There have been a lot of folks waiting for the anecdotal evidence to start creeping into the hard data. Some people are looking at today's report as the beginning of that. The White House is certainly not. White House says this is proof that tariffs are not inflationary. Are they right?
Well, first of all, I think it's too early to call it one way or the other, in that the tariffs really went into effect August 1st. Some have been delayed. The China ones have been delayed further. And so we don't know what the full effect of tariffs are going to be yet. You know, the analysis is that we're moving from a world in which the effective tariff rate was about 2.5% to one where it's about 18% in total. That difference is going to be eaten somewhere. Some might be eaten by the exporting business in the foreign country if the importer has enough leverage. Some might be eaten by the importer, but that'll show up in earnings. And we've seen that already in some cases, and that'll show up in the stock market. And some will get passed on to the consumer. You know, we have seen core CPI tick up now from 2.8 to 2.9, now 3.1%. It'll be interesting to see what core PCE looks like in a couple of weeks. But certainly, I think it's too early to tell. There tends to be a lag between the actual implementation of tariffs and the inflationary effect, and even a longer lag between the implementation of tariffs and the slowdown in the economy. So I wouldn't be terribly complacent right now. I think I'd be a wait and see sort of attitude.
Well, this is certainly not a complacent Fed at the moment, resisting calls to cut interest rates from the president of the United States. And we're still waiting for trade deals to be completed. Mike, China's the big one. We just got another 90 days, and I wonder your thoughts on where this stands right now. I'd like to ask you about some of the back and forth with some of our AI chip makers yesterday, but just broadly speaking, 90 days isn't enough time to strike a trade deal with the world's second largest economy, is it?
Well, it depends on what kind of deal they have in mind. I mean, what we've seen over the last 6 months is an escalation of tensions and a de-escalation. We haven't really seen the fundamental issues underlying the economic relationship dealt with. You know, the kind of reforms that you'd want to see in China to move towards a more consumer demand-led economy, less reliant on export-led growth, less reliant on subsidies, et cetera. We've tried with China over a long period of time to get them to change their policies. I'd say with only modest success. The first Trump administration took a different approach, which was basically to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement and get the Chinese to buy more soybeans, more LNG, some other products as well. The Chinese bought about 50% of what they committed to. Partly that was COVID, partly, though, they didn't really fulfill what they had been agreed to. The question for the second Trump administration is, are they going to go back to a purchase and sale agreement, or are they going to try to deal with the underlying issues? And is there a way of using leverage in all of its forms, whether it's tariffs or other mechanisms, to get the Chinese to really begin to think through changing their economic strategy or not? When it comes to the export controls that you raised, Joe, I think that's a very difficult and in some ways disturbing trend. Export controls have been used in the past to say this technology is so critical to our national security that we're not going to allow it to be sold to our adversaries or our competitors. It hasn't been used as a trade chip, as a chip in a trade negotiation. What we've seen now is we've gone from taking a chip that, as of April, had been prohibited from being sold to China, and now saying we have an economic interest by the U.S. government in selling more and more because we're going to get a 15% revenue share. Yes, that's a fundamental new view on the role of export controls, and it raises real questions about the credibility of controls when they're put in place.
Questions raised last evening when I spoke with Democratic Congressman Raja Krishnamurthy of Illinois. He's ranking member on the House China Select Committee, deeply concerned about this 15% arrangement. Michael, here's what he said.
First thing that the commander-in-chief and the president needs to do is to protect our country. And so when he basically says that our national security is for sale, that our crown jewels can be obtained through some kind of revenue sharing agreement with the United States government, that is a horrible sign to our adversaries. What are we going to do next? Sell aircraft carriers to the Chinese and the government takes a 20% cut? This is horrible. We should not be engaged in the sale of these H-20 chips to the CCP.
Begs the question, Michael Froman, in our remaining moment here, where's the line on this? I don't think we're about to start selling aircraft carriers to the Chinese, but could this be, if it's unprecedented, now extended to other companies and other industries?
I think we have to be very careful about that and really focus. You know, the Biden administration pursued what they called a small yard and a high fence. So be very selective about the technologies that you put controls around, but then make sure that they can't make their way to China. And that, by the way, is also important to get other allies on board who produce similar products. If they're going to restrict their exporters from selling to China, they want to know that the U.S. is going to do the same thing. So I would hope that this administration and the national security people would step in and say, this technology either is or is not critical to our national security. And if it is, then let's make sure we have adequate controls around it.
A small yard with a high fence. Michael Froman, great to talk with you again. President of the Council on Foreign Relations, former USTR in the Obama administration. Michael, thank you. Coming up, now that President Trump has deployed hundreds of National Guard troops in Washington, D.C., we'll discuss how other cities are bracing for potential action from the administration when we speak with two mayors next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Full, seamless, integrated cooperation at all levels of law enforcement, and will deploy officers across the district with an overwhelming presence. You'll have more police, and you'll be so happy. You're going to see FBI agents. We're going to have a lot of agents on the streets. And you're going to have a lot of, essentially, military, and we will bring in the military if it's needed, by the way.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. President Trump there yesterday announcing his move to take federal control of Washington, D.C.'s police department and deploy National Guard troops here in a push to tamp down what he calls historic crime levels, despite data from the ground showing otherwise. The question is the president's action in D.C. a sign of things to come in cities nationwide? We'll have a look from both sides of the aisle tonight. To kick off the conversation right now with Democratic Mayor of Hartford, Connecticut, Arulampalam. Mayor, it's great to have you with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. The president has clearly taken action here in Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure. He's also singled out cities like Chicago and New York as potentially needing assistance like this from the federal government. What would be your reaction to seeing the federalization of your police department or National Guard troops on the streets of Hartford?
Well, Joe, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me. Let's start with some honest facts here about what's going on. D.C. has had historic lows in this last year in violent crime, their lowest numbers in about 30 years. In fact, violent crime is down about 30%. And that's what we've seen in cities all across America this past year, in Chicago, in L.A., in Nashville, in Baltimore, in Cleveland, in Mayor Dyer's city of Fresno. I know you're having him on in a moment. He's a good friend.
That's right.
And here in Hartford, we had the lowest number of shootings we've had on record in the city of Hartford, about 43% less than they were 2 years ago. And cities and mayors have shown that we are making real gains when it comes to public safety. And that should be really good news for a president who campaigned on law and order, for a president who campaigned on public safety. That should be good news. And unfortunately, what this president has done, instead of calling up Hartford and saying, how did you get these historic lows, instead of going to the mayor of D.C. and asking, how did you bring down violent crime 30%? He has slashed public safety funding. He's defunded our police after all the concern we had for many years of Democrats defunding police. This big, beautiful bill has cut dollars to law enforcement locally, to federal law enforcement agencies, to community-based violence intervention programs that we know are working. The data is showing that it is working. And it is almost as if he woke up and realized that he campaigned on public safety and had nothing to show for it. And the only people getting things done, the folks keeping our community safe, are mayors, working together with law enforcement and communities to create safer and healthier cities, better cities, and more safe cities. Mayors are really getting things done. And instead of engaging us mayors and asking what they can do better and how they can support the efforts that are working, instead of talking to us mayors, and many of us happen to be Democrats, but we just want what is best for our residents, what they've done instead is slash public safety funding and then engage in this distraction that, frankly, is unnecessary and chaotic and dangerous.
Well, you've isolated public safety funding as an issue, and that's duly noted here. I want to get to what else might be right or wrong with the deployment of National Guard troops, the federalization of the police, because I'm looking at the same data you are, and I live here in Washington, D.C., and I've been around here for a minute. I realize that there have been pretty great strides made, certainly since 2023, when things like carjackings were really peaking around here, and it was a big topic of conversation. But Mayor, what I've heard from a lot of people who live in town is, we're at a 30-year low, and we're proud of that. But you know what? I still don't feel safe. And I might not have a problem with a couple of officers at a cruiser on the corner here on my way home. Is there a problem with the optical impact of what the president is doing?
Yeah, and let me be clear. We have so much left to go. Any one person getting shot, any one person having their car stolen, any one person experiencing the trauma of crime is one too many. And we want to work to create better solutions. Mayor Dyer, who you're going to talk to in a moment, was a police officer himself. And he will tell you, I hope, that police officers receive a completely different set of training than that National Guard does. So it makes no sense to cut funds to actual police officers in our city. It makes no sense to cut funds to these programs that we know are working, coming out of PD, coming out of our cities, that are actually working to reduce crime. It makes no sense to stop the progress that is actually happening and then talk about bringing in the National Guard. It is an attempt by this White House, frankly, to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. We are making real strides when it comes to public safety. And instead of finding and identifying what is working and how do we fund those solutions that are working, they're slashing those very solutions that are working in cities and then talking about bringing in the National Guard, who have no experience in law enforcement in cities.
Have you asked the White House for extra funding or an emergency supplemental for your police department?
Well, look, when in the Biden administration, love him or hate him, in the Biden administration, we had real conversations with the White House. They reached out to us and asked us what we need when it comes to public safety. I don't have any relationship with anyone in the White House, and I think every city has tried to develop those relationships. We would love to try to get additional funding. It also, fundamentally, it bothers me that this is a president who is defunding police, defunding dollars that are going to local law enforcement in our cities, in our communities, defunding dollars that are going to federal law enforcement, the DEA and the ATF and enforcement agencies that we work closely with to take down crime rates, and then talking about public safety in our major cities. You can't cut the dollars to our law enforcement and then expect our cities to believe you when you talk about wanting to have safer, stronger communities.
It's good to have you with us, Mayor. Come back and talk to us. I will say that whether it's yourself as a Democrat or the Republican mayor we are about to speak with, it is very clear that mayors don't always have the luxury of politicians in Washington. They actually have to deal with reality and constituents. Democratic Mayor of Hartford, Arunan Arulampalam, thank you so much for your insights. Now, as we promised, from a view from across the aisle and across the country in this case, is Republican Mayor Jerry Dyer of Fresno, California. Mr. Mayor, it's good to see you and meet you today, along with the mayor of Hartford, who was just talking about you. And of course, he's right. You were a police officer for a long time before you were a politician. 40 years in the Fresno Police Department, 18 years as the chief of police. So you've got some credibility in this conversation. Is President Trump augmenting or distracting local police in cities like Washington?
I can't speak to the circumstances of what's happened in Washington, D.C. I don't know what their true crime numbers are other than what I read in the news. But I do know oftentimes there is a distance between crime rates and the way people feel in a community. And it's that feeling of safety that really matters. And in terms of deploying the National Guard or any type of federal resources, I can tell you in my time as a police chief, I welcomed the partnerships that we had with some of our federal agencies, whether that was ATF, DEA, or FBI. But it was always done at the request generally of myself, asking for those entities to come in. We would have some type of a cooperative agreement, joint task force, unified command. There was good communication. But there was always this cooperative relationship. And today what we're seeing, whether it was in LA or DC, with the deployment of the Federal Guard or Federal National Guard, it was done outside of the request of the local jurisdiction. And so what I have found over the years is that crime, it's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. Everyone wants to feel safe. And the debate oftentimes is, how do we make them feel safe? We definitely, in law enforcement, do not want to be seen as an occupying force in neighborhoods. We want to be seen as a welcomed presence. And when we are seen as a welcome presence in neighborhoods by folks, they're more likely to cooperate, provide us with information that helps us to solve crime, solve shootings. And so that's what we strive for, is to have a working relationship with our community. And sometimes if we're seen as an occupying force, I can tell you there's going to be an adverse impact.
Well, we're showing some crime statistics from Fresno. Homicides, rape, aggravated assault, all down 2024 to 2025. There we have them again on your screen if you're with us on Bloomberg TV yes. or on YouTube. Robbery was up a bit, but that's a composite improvement across the board here. When you consider the language that we're hearing from the president, I don't know if you're different than the mayor of Hartford, who says he doesn't even know who to call and does not have an open dialogue with the White House. But the data speak for themselves here. The optics are another part of this. Does it help to have more uniformed officers or even National Guards troops walking the streets to make people feel as if they're safer?
Well, let me ask that in a second, but just to talk about some of those crime numbers, that's only comparing 25 to 24. When you look at where we were in America in 2020 and 2021, violent crime skyrocketed. We had the pandemic, we had the George Floyd murder, you had all those things that caused a lot of crime increases. I can tell you in 2020 our high mark in 2020, we had 732 shootings in our city. Today, 7.5 months through the year, we have 105. You saw the graphic there. We actually have 13 murders. Back in 2021, we had 74. So we are going in a good direction. So the question is, do we need, for example, in Fresno, do we need the increased presence of National Guardsmen? No, absolutely not. Do they need them in D.C.? Based on the numbers I saw, I would say no. But I'm not a resident in that city. But I would say from a law enforcement perspective, as a mayor of Fresno, I would not want the National Guard coming into our city because at some point in time, they're going to leave. And the local jurisdiction is going to be the one that has to deal with whatever fallout there may be to be able to regain the trust of the community. And so I would say we've made considerable progress. We're not where we need to be yet. And it's not necessarily the number of people you have on the streets. It's strategies that you utilize with those folks to combat crime. And I think in American policing today, we're going in a very, very good direction.
Well, it's really interesting to hear you say all of that. And it kind of brings us back to my original question, Mr. Mayor, that the introduction of National Guard troops or even the federalization of a local police department, and by the way, no one's talking about doing either to Fresno, does not in fact help local officials. It undermines them.
Yeah, whatever we do between the federal government and the local government, whether it's the mayor or the police chiefs, it really needs to be done in a cooperative way. There needs to be discussions that occur between federal agencies and local agencies, how we can best police a city. And it's not about taking over, in my opinion, it's about working cooperatively. And at the end of the day, it's about keeping people safe, not who's in charge, not necessarily who has more police officers on the streets. It's how we can cooperatively police our cities and to keep people safe. And at the same time, make sure that people trust us as we're doing that. Mm-hmm. Trust is vital. We lose that trust in the community. And we've done that many times over the years in American policing. Very, very hard to get back. So, you know, I hope that there will be some middle ground that they can find in D.C. I do hope that this doesn't spread across America because I think it would have an adverse impact in our ability today and in the future to be able to police in some of our neighborhoods in America. And certainly in Fresno, we're doing fine right now. And but if we need assistance, I know exactly who to call, when to call to get federal assistance to come into our city.
He's the former police chief, now Republican mayor of Fresno, California, Jerry Dyer. Many thanks, Mr. Mayor, for spending some time with us, and thank you for your service. Coming up, we'll turn back to our conversation on the state of trade when we assembled our political panel. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Some of the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. AI startup Perplexity is making a formal offer to acquire Google's Chrome browser for more than $34 billion. According to the company, the unsolicited bid was sent Tuesday morning. Google did not respond to a request for comment. San Francisco-based Perplexity has previously sought to attract users from Google with its search powered by AI. Last year, a federal judge ruled that Google has an illegal monopoly in internet search. Among the proposed changes here, selling off the Chrome browser. Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon is the latest executive to face the ire of President Trump, who says the bank was wrong about the impact of tariffs on markets and consumer costs. The president posting to social media, quote, David Solomon and Goldman Sachs refused to give credit where credit is due. They made a bad prediction a long time ago on both the market repercussion and the tariffs themselves, and they were wrong, just like they are wrong about so much else, unquote. Trump did not specify why he was upset about the bank, but his comments follow guidance from the firm published Sunday that said the impact of the president's tariffs on consumer prices was just starting to be felt. He suggests Solomon go spend time working as a DJ. And George Washington University is the latest U.S. college targeted by the Department of Justice over pro-Palestine student protests. from last spring. In a letter sent to the university's president, the DOJ accused GWU of violating federal civil rights law. The letter also claimed the school was, quote, deliberately indifferent to alleged anti-Semitic harassment and discrimination on campus during demonstrations. While the DOJ did not specify what enforcement it would proceed with, similar accusations against universities like Columbia, Brown, and Harvard resulted in funding freezes and subsequent negotiations. The GWU spokesperson said the school, quote, condemns anti-Semitism and is reviewing the letter. Earlier this hour, I spoke with Peter Navarro, the White House senior counselor for trade and manufacturing, who said small businesses in the U.S. need not worry about rising costs because they won't pay the tariff costs. Take a listen to what he said.
The reason why we're not seeing inflation because of the tariffs is because it's the foreign countries that are eating the tariffs. Why did they do that? Foreign countries, the big ones we run the big trade deficits with, we are their biggest market. Okay? If they can't sell to us, they're in trouble.
Joining us now with their reaction to this and the other stories we're following our political panel. Megan Hayes is back with us, former special assistant to President Biden, our Democratic strategist, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camuso-Miller, former communications director at the RNC and host of the Friday Reporter podcast. Great to have you both with us. Ladies, Lisa, I'll start with you as our Republican. You heard the case made from Peter Navarro and the framing of today's data from the White House, saying again, you keep predicting inflation, but it doesn't happen. Is today's report vindication?
Well, I think that there's a lot of information that's out there and still a lot of folks that are waiting to see. A lot of these indicators, Joe, as you well know, here at Bloomberg, are that they're lagging indicators. And so a lot of that, what's going to happen next is really what we're waiting for. So, yes, I think the White House and I think the administration and the folks all around town who are touting these tariffs and touting these policies will feel as if today is a good sign that things are headed in the right direction. I think, though, that the rest of industry, the rest of the manufacturing and the other folks that are in these trade spaces are waiting for the next shoe to drop and wondering what will happen.
Well, that's a problem when we talk about politics here, because the data, as we learned in the Biden administration, you were there for it. Data can say anything. If people feel differently, that's what matters. So when you consider the next couple of months, people holding off spending plans, the uncertainty around tariffs, as Lisa just illustrated, Stu Leonard Jr. telling us he's hanging by his fingernails, a small business owner. What does that mean when it comes to politics domestically?
I think that this is going to impact the midterms in a way that the Republicans are not ready for. And also, when we go on to websites and you go on to Amazon or other small businesses, even on websites, and it is saying this is the impact that tariffs are having. This is the tariff cost, and it's being added. Walmart said they're raising their prices. These are real people buying real goods. They don't necessarily are not following these numbers, whether they're the jobs numbers or the inflation numbers. All they are following is how much they are paying at a grocery store, how much their housing is costing, and how much money they have at the end of every month, which is getting smaller and smaller. And that is what has a real impact on how people vote.
Interesting when we consider trade with China, which is a big part of this tariff story. They've got a 90-day extension. They're actually living under tariffs right now, but there could be a trade deal. And they're now apparently going to be able to buy AI chips, lower-end chips like the H20 from the likes of Nvidia, similar chip from the likes of AMD. And those companies have agreed to pay 15% of their sales to the U.S. government for the luxury of having licenses to sell those products. It's being called unprecedented and corrosive to the concept of capitalism. Lisa, how are you looking at this?
It seems to me like if they're willing to pay 15%, how much do they see as the opportunity that they could then win and earn if those chips are getting to where they need to go? And that, I think, to me, seems like where they see opportunity. So if they are willing to pay that kind of bounty, I suspect that their suspicion is that they can make quite a bit more if that's the case.
Well, so they get rich, but shareholders are saying, hey, we bought a stock in Nvidia or AMD. Nobody told us 15% of the proceeds are going to the government. Is that a good way to do business?
You know, I wonder if this is maybe the way things are headed and the way that stock and you know, shareholders will have to think about their purchases going forward. I certainly do think that it's going to influence behavior quite a bit.
I talked to Jake Auchincloss about this today, Democratic congressman from Massachusetts, who had a very different take on this whole thing. By the way, he thinks it's a very bad idea, but talked about President Trump's meme coin and what he sees as one of the major sources of corruption in this administration. Listen.
This deal makes me shudder to consider what a TikTok deal might look like, what an ultimate tariff deal might look like. And again, orbiting around these considerations is who is buying the Trump coin. This is the central issue of corruption of his first year in office. More than half of his net worth is tied up in this coin. We have no idea who owns it. The people who showed up at the White House for this crypto dinner, those are just the ones who want to be seen. The Qataris, the Turks, the Venezuelans, the Chinese, they probably didn't want to be seen. We don't know who's bought him.
Before we go down this road, I want to be clear. Bloomberg News reached out to Nvidia on this. The congressman introduced this idea on our air today on the early edition of Balance of Power. Nvidia did not respond to a request for comment on these assertions. But as he suggested, he and Elizabeth Warren are both ready to go to the mat on this and start an inquiry. Is this the new line of attack by Democrats? Because I have not heard this anywhere before today.
I think the corruption issue is a real problem for both Democrats and Republicans. I think that when you can start to see where the money is going, and everyone knows that Trump doesn't make deals unless it benefits him and his family. That has been well documented in the first term, and it's being well documented now. Just look at the plane that he was going to take from Qatar. That is going to benefit him later in life. So I think that there's some real questions here that people have, both Democrats and Republicans. And yes, it is a political issue, but this is also an issue for our economy and our economy moving forward. Having corruption this deep into our government is very bad for our democracy. And I don't mean to sound alarmist or hyperbolic, but I do feel like Democrats and Republicans have got to get a hold of this, or it is going to spin out of control.
Well, if Democrats are going to be sounding the alarm on this, is this something that needs to be investigated? And I'm trying to be deliberate about this. Should there be an investigation into who's buying the Trump meme coin, particularly if they're investing in the U.S. government?
You know, yes. I've heard this before. This is not a new rumor to people like myself who are out and about.
That even the likes of Nvidia might.
I don't know necessarily about them, but I have been hearing a lot about the crypto issue.
Sure.
The problem with all of this, Joe, is that our Congress is not sophisticated enough to ask the right questions. Just like we asked Mark Zuckerberg to come Washington D.C. and talk to us about Facebook not that long ago. Yes. The difficulty is that these issues are so complex, and our congressmen they don't have a deep understanding of it, that yes, they'll investigate it, and it will go nowhere in Washington, D.C.
Because they're, as someone said earlier, driving around with 8-track tapes in their cars. Is that where we're at on Capitol Hill?
There's a serious age problem, but I don't think that's the lack of sophistication. I worry about this as we're going to start needing to regulate AI. We are so far behind the ball on regulating of AI. To your point, they don't know the right questions to ask. I understand they have to be an inch deep on everything. It's really hard to be an expert when you're a member of Congress, but corruption is the foremost problem in our government right now, and they need to be doing investigations on this.
Does that apply to insider trading for members of Congress?
I think so.
Both sides of the aisle.
I mean,
we'll see if that happens in the next couple of months, because there is a drive.
Absolutely.
Happen. Great panel. Megan Hayes and Lisa Camuso-Miller. We appreciate your insights so much on Balance of Power. An important programming note, you're going to want to set your clock for this. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will be joining Bloomberg Surveillance tomorrow morning, live, 7:30 a.m. Eastern Time, talking about his new role as the acting IRS commissioner, today's CPI data, the ongoing Fed share search, and a lot more. 7:30 a.m. tomorrow here on Bloomberg. I'm Joe Matthew. We'll see you back here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.